Welcome to the On-Premise IT Roundtable podcast, the only show that dares to be both on topic and on location, or on-premise and on-premises. Each time we meet, we bring together a group of IT luminaries to discuss a single concept or premise. In this episode, we're discussing security and backup, the collision thereof, and the fact that basically backup is just a massive security hole. Or maybe not. But before we begin, let's meet the panel.
Hi, I'm Karen Lopez. I'm Data Chick on Twitter. I blog at datamodel.com.
Hi, I'm Corey Younger. I'm SDN Daughter on Twitter, at CyberCorey on Instagram, and I blog at totalpackets.com.
Hi, I'm Josh Fidel. I'm a Principal Solution Architect with Rolta Advisix. You can catch me on Twitter at JCEFIDEL, and I blog at thevfidel.com.
So we have been talking about backup quite a lot, and it occurs to me that basically nothing would be more succulent and delicious for an evil actor than a backup, because you basically have all the data, right? I mean, it's got to be the biggest security hole there is. Are we? Who's going to agree with me here?
Yeah, so I'll agree with you. Not only do you have all the data in a backup, you also are just perpetuating bad data. So say a malactor goes and infects a backup. Every single time that data set is being backed up, you are just perpetuating this bad data set. So as you spread that data, as you pass data either inside your organization or outside your organization, all you're doing is infecting other hosts.
So I disagree. Like, it might be the technical security hole, but we all know that people are the biggest security hole, right? Humans and your cats, if you let them also walk on your keyboard, which I do. So I don't think that backups inherently have to be a security risk, but I certainly think that a lot of times IT professionals forget that they need to secure those as well.
So Karen, are you saying that we can catch these security flaws in the backups, or how are you saying that they're not a security risk?
So I'm not saying they're not. I say they can be,
Okay.
but they need to be secured, but they're not often secured the same way as a production system, because some backups are offline, some backups are in a different place, or they're already compressed and encrypted because you don't worry about performance of an already written backup, like those kinds of things. But when I say that sometimes backups are security holes, it's because someone's just copying a file, whether it's automated or not, and then I've seen backup tapes sitting out in a office lobby ready to be picked up by Iron Mountain, and it's there in a big box that says Iron Mountain on it, and that says to me there's probably data on it.
Yeah, anybody with a vest and a clipboard could
come
walk
and
in there and walk off with that box and have all the data.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I guess that goes back to what you said, is that humans are the security hole.
Yeah.
So if we have security analysts now putting on the storage hat, which I'll be honest, I study security and that's my chosen field,
Yep.
but I never think about storage, ever. So if we put on the storage hat for a second and say, hold up, let me double check this data before I run a backup. Let me double check this before I pull it down from the cloud or send it back up. We could stop that train of badness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely that, because I don't know a lot of people that you're under this pressure. Is the system back up? Is the system back up? RTO and RPO, and do they run scans on it before they restore it? I don't know, but maybe we should.
So let's organize the conversation a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I think both of you have agreed in this conversation so far that backup has the potential to be a massive security hole, because all the data is there, and it all depends on how you manage it. Am I getting it right?
I think so.
Yeah, I think that we need some training and awareness around storage security, because I definitely think that's a part of the industry that we just haven't even looked into, or maybe storage security people, maybe you're just hiding. So speak up, tweet us at Gestalt IT Podcast.
Yeah, no. So yeah, we are definitely not hiding. I've been studying that for a long time. You know, there's me. Josh, what do you think, man? You want to jump in here?
So eventually the argument's going to go away because so many companies are doing things in the realm of anomaly detection, AI, machine learning, what your data sets look like on a regular basis. Hey, something has changed drastically. Your data delta is something insane, then yeah, something probably got messed up along the way. However, before you even back it up, why aren't you automating data scrubbing processes to make sure that your data doesn't get corrupted before it even goes to that process? I think that's where.
It's not an either or though, right? We should
Oh
be
no,
doing all these things.
it's all of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
It's never a blueberry, it's an onion.
Yeah.
Layers.
Layers.
And
Layers.
you can't just squish the blueberry. You have to be very delicate and very careful and make sure that, when we're using AI and machine learning, that we're being so careful in that we are scrubbing the data and making sure that our data sets are pure, because it is so easy to write in for bad data and make that a part of your learned environment. And I've seen use cases time and time again of environments that, malicious code or a threat was never caught because the algorithm actually learned that as the base environment. So I think as we shift to that, we need to just be very, very cautious.
So there's a bunch of different concerns here in terms of security as well. So you've got sort of the confidentiality angle, meaning somebody walks off with a box of unencrypted tapes that contain all of your data, right? So that's a big problem. You've got the integrity angle, which Corey's brought up in terms of, perpetuating corrupted data, or, you get a malware attack and pretty soon that gets written into your snapshots and gets written into your replicated environment and gets written onto your tapes, and suddenly, you've lost. And, and then you've got the availability angle as well. Backups could theoretically be used as a denial of service vector. But, I think that maybe that one's less of a concern because the other ones are such a great concern. Personally, I'd like to focus in on the first one, though, the confidentiality thing. So, as we're doing more and more SaaS backup and backup in the cloud and backup to disk and stuff like that, you really are opening up your data to intrusion, right?
Every copy of your data is a security risk, right? So one of the things I want to point out is that not everyone does backups for disaster recovery or business continuity. Another really common reason why organizations do backups is so they can do a backup in production and restore it into dev test so that they can use production data, unencrypted, unsecured, unmasked data in dev and test. And I think that's probably 95%, and I'm probably being too nice, of organizations that do this. And they do it because it takes a lot of time to create test data. And so people make backups for business continuity, but they use restores for a whole bunch of risky things as well. And a lot of times that's some of the most common data breaches is people have restored production data, and maybe to get it to their developers, they put it in an S3 bucket, and that was unsecured. And a lot of those breaches are happening because of dev tests, not because of production.
That's a really smart observation, yeah. Mm-hmm. So,
I guess if you're going to do things like that, why aren't you doing proper security auditing? Either hire an outside firm or have somebody inside become a security.
But everyone's aware of it. It's part of their process.
Well, or people are blissfully unaware. As soon as you pass something off to developers or your test team, you kind of wash your hands of it. And
That's
you
what
say,
they do.
all right, this is out of my environment, and I no longer have to worry about it. I was talking earlier with someone about the liability of data. So when we choose a cloud vendor, who are we trusting with our data? We oftentimes just pass it off to someone and say, okay, well now I trust you. You're using the right encryption. You're taking the right security protocols, and we're not sharing this liability. We don't even have a proper liability or shared risk matrix for storage vendors. So I think that we need to be very conscious when we choose a storage solution, and also be very conscious of what data we're storing and where.
Absolutely. I mean, data classification is every time there's a data breach, a company will say, we don't believe any credit card or password information was compromised. But there's a whole ton other types of data that could be in there. And based on my experience, most organizations have no idea what data is in what database is in what file. Mm-hmm. They haven't done the indexing, they haven't done the data classification.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I feel like they just say those things because those are the things that they're going to get penalized on immediately, and that way they can kind of cover their proverbial butts a little bit to not get in trouble immediately. And then, of course, the other aspect that's always predictable and hilarious is the escalation of data loss after a breach. It's like, oh, only a few customers have been affected. Pretty soon it's 1 million customers have been affected. Pretty soon it's the entire world is affected,
I think that, so what I do in consulting is I quantify the risk of data. I put into money terms for the non-IT people the value of securing your data. And I think that if more companies did this proactively before deciding where to store their data, they'd be a lot more careful about what they're putting where. Because when you have a breach, you're not just facing the fines, you have the legal fees, remediation, loss of business, and you're facing the consequences of these actions for years to come, just because of, one admin or IT personnel choosing to press a button and store something on-prem or in the cloud versus on-prem.
I agree with you, but I will say, are there really any consequences these days?
Yeah.
I mean, we've
No.
had these, we know that GDPR has some big, like 4% global revenue, which is big. That's the entire margin for some industries, right? But have we really seen, with the largest breaches, anyone being crippling business?
There have been companies who have been guilty of massive breaches, and they're still in business. Mm-hmm. So I would say no, there really isn't. They may have paid a fine, which, is it punitive enough? I don't know.
Yeah, and maybe we need to redo the fine structure and make it a percentage instead of, and I think there is a percentage factor in there, but make it a percentage instead of the 1.5 or whatever it is. But yeah, I don't think it's detrimental to business, but maybe there needs to be more done. And definitely I think there needs to be more awareness after a breach. I think that we're so concerned with penalizing someone instead of teaching them what they did wrong, and making it an example for the industry.
It's a cost incentive, though. Is it going to cost me more to pay the fines after the breach, or more to protect myself before the breach?
Yeah, if the security solution's $3 million and the fine's $1.5 million.
I would say it's not just the financial cost of doing those things, but it's also consider the loss of goodwill after the breach. Is that enough to cause your business serious damage? You can attribute real dollar value to that.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I like about GDPR is it has the opportunity for criminal proceedings against highly negligent, or leaders who have chosen to do the cost-benefit risk and say, the fine's only this. Like the largest fine in our industry is $100,000, and it's going to cost us more to hire someone to do this work.
So let me focus on that actually, because that's a really interesting angle. You guys have mentioned GDPR a couple times here. I haven't, back to the topic of backup, I haven't heard much about GDPR and backup except with regard to things like e-discovery. We saw, we see companies that have like e-discovery or data governance products touting the value of their data, of their system to like identify, personally identifiable information or credit card numbers or whatever it is. But I haven't really heard a lot of talk about GDPR specifically with backup. When people talk about backup, a lot of the time they don't seem to even think of GDPR as one of the considerations. Like, is that even on the RFP? Is that something that they're considering? I guess maybe.
In a general sense, I believe it is covered because the right to be forgotten laws, you can notify a company that you want all your data scrubbed from their records and they have to go through. Mm-hmm. Fine. Maybe they don't have any record of you, but they still have to do the search and erase those records, right? Does that include backups? I would say in a general sense it does, because it's a data set that your company owns.
Yeah, I think it's covered in there because many privacy and security compliance legislation don't make a distinction of what that data was for. Is it a replicated database for performance reasons? Is it production? Is it a backup? Is it a printout of a report that came out of it? I don't think it makes a distinction on that. I think, though, that I've talked to a lot of organizations that have forgotten about their backups because, of course, production is their first priority of knowing where the data is. But the other part of right to be forgotten is just right to know. Like, you can ask, I want to see all the data you collect about me, and not just to be forgotten. And a lot of companies, especially outside the EU, are struggling with that because they literally do not know what data they have about a person.
Except now they're required by law.
And I think that one of the things that Karen said actually really resonates with me as well, because again, I'm the storage guy. I was a storage administrator. I was the email administrator. I was one of those people that was doing that stuff. I will admit that I never really thought about backups when I was thinking about, like it wasn't top of mind. You know what I mean? Somebody would talk to me about something, this application or this data set or whatever, and I was always thinking of which server is it on, which storage array is it on, that kind of things. I mean, backups were just sort of taken for granted, and I imagine that they probably are in a lot of cases. Even if GDPR is relevant, maybe people aren't thinking about it. I wonder if lawyers are thinking about it. I wonder if
I hope
courts.
so, because it's
So,
Yeah, good point.
wow.
And so another aspect of data protection with regard to security that we haven't talked about yet, and again, as a storage guy, this was very relevant to me because it was a big challenge to get backups working. You have to give the backup application like super user access. You have to give it access to all the data, even access sometimes that you don't have. So as a systems administrator, obviously I could have root on my Unix systems, right? But on shared storage and things like that, there was a lot of data that I wasn't allowed to see. Maybe I could have seen it if I really tried, but I wasn't supposed to be looking at. But I had to get access to that automatically for the backup system. Does that scare you guys to think about the fact that basically we're granting the backup system super user access to literally every data set in the business?
I'm not entirely too concerned with it, just because of encryption. The fact that, this data isn't sitting there in plain text, so someone can't just sit there and take all the data from us.
But you have to give it access past encryption. You can't just back up encrypted blobs. You have to have the system have access to the data, period. All the data.
Yeah, and anything that can be encrypted can be de-encrypted. So regardless of the fact, you do have all the data sitting there. But, I see it as there's no way to get around it. So it doesn't bother me all that much. And I don't see backups as a huge target of attacks, although maybe after seeing this, they may be.
Exactly. Yes. Sorry about that, the world. We're just opening up a new avenue of attack here. So, well, I guess I'll ask you guys to sum up here at the end of this conversation then. How do you think, after this conversation, do you think that backups are a massive security risk or not? I'm going to start with you, Josh, so I'll give you a second to think. Do you think that this has been proven, or do you think that this is still up in the air, or are you just not so worried about it?
So the professional part of me says I'm not so worried about it because there are good engineers and good security people who know how to handle their business and will take care of it. The realist in me says, oh dear God.
Corey, what do you think?
So yeah, I do think that backups are still and will continue to be a rising problem. And I think the way that we mitigate that is by, considering that all security problems are people-first problems, and making sure that people are vigilant in developing good products that, run security scans on backups, and that we're very careful about the data that we back up and store for long amounts of time, and in where we store our data?
I think that all copies of data are data. And so whether it's a massive security risk, I do think it's one of the overlooked things, just like printed or otherwise distributed data can be also forgotten about, is that we tend to overly focus on app security and production databases and all those things, and not all the places where data goes. JSON files, XML files, messaging, all of that stuff. But I think that having this discussion is raising that awareness and everything, and that all data is attractive for someone messing with it or taking it.
Absolutely. I think that's the key takeaway for me is that right there, that as you said, I love the quote you said. Basically, all data is a potential security risk. All copies of data, all data everywhere, and it's important to remember that backup is a copy of data, and is a potential security risk. I mean, I'm definitely on the side that this is a risk. Now, maybe, as Corey points out, maybe it's not a risk that's been exploited too much, but it probably will be, and we'll see what happens with that. Thank you for listening to the On-Premise IT Roundtable. If you enjoyed this discussion, remember to subscribe, rate, and review the show in iTunes, since that really helps our visibility. And please share this show with your friends. This podcast was brought to you by GestaltIT.com, your home for IT coverage from across the enterprise. For show notes and more, go to GestaltIT.com/podcast. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.